Kelvin Davis.
Mr. Speaker, tuatahi māku me whai wāhia hau ki te mihi atu ki te ro ngā tuahine a Hekea Parata, Honourable Hekea Parata, ko tōhua hei minute o te krauna I tērā wiki, ko pāhore ake nei I te wahanga o ngā tautohe o te committee, ko wareware hau ki te mihi atu kia koe Hekea. Nā reira, tēnā rā koe mo tēnei honoretanga, heirongi o poko whiwhi me ki heirongi a tātou te iwi Māori. Nā reira, tēnā koe, tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party is not going to support this bill, aside from the part that Trevor Mallard's just mentioned, that protects children in those daycare centres. And, I'm glad for it because I believe that this legislation will do very little to actually raise achievement, and which is what I believe all education legislation and education policy should be targeted at. I think we spend too much time focusing on the peripheral issues, such as whether or not families can have hereditary rights to attend the school that their parents went to. I just think that is a total waste of our time. Perhaps when we've covered all the other main issues in education, which would take a number of decades, I believe, then eventually we might finally get to that, and that might be the top of the list, the top of the priority list. But right now it's, in my opinion, way down at the bottom of the list, and we should be focusing on the core issues that are going to raise achievement. And I've already spoken a couple of times now in the House about making sure that teachers are given the conditions where they can weave their magic. And it's up to us in this House to create those conditions as politicians, as policymakers. And we need to make sure that teachers understand that they have to be able to account for the effect size on the strategies they use. They need to be able to tell whether or not what they're doing in classrooms or in tertiary institutions or in early childhood centres, they need to know that what they're doing, improve that what they're doing is making is actually making a difference. They need to be able to question their practice. They need to have these skills, and this is what we need to be legislating for. This is what we need to have policy around, making sure teachers can question the efficacy or otherwise of their practice, challenge their assumptions, and actually go on and make changes where necessary. And we should be aiming for 100% of our students right across New Zealand leaving school at the end of year 13 with NCEA level 3 or university entrance as well. On top of that, I don't think that we do enough to actually engage kids in school, and this is something else that teachers need to be able to do, is engage students at school right through until the end of their year 13, because research says it's not so much the success of a student in their adult life is not so dependent on how high their qualifications are, but rather the length of time that they spend at school. So in other words, a student who only achieves NCEA level 1, if they stay right at school through until the end of year 13, they've got more chance of being successful as an adult than if they get NCEA level 1 in year 11 and then drop out. So we need to encourage and create the conditions where students will stay at school right through to the end of year 13. And as well, we need to work with parents, and this is about engaging parents in the education of their children so that parents set the expectation in their children's minds at the very earliest age, and they consistently apply that expectation that their kids will stay through at school until the end of their year 13 year, because a student would actually be better off eating their lunch for 13 years at school than dropping out in, say, year 9, year 10 or year 11. But please don't, I don't want people to think that that's what I'm encouraging students to do. Mr. Speaker, so professional development is something that we really, really need to support our teachers with. And this morning I was up in just north of Wellsford at the opening of a marae, and I heard this story from Bishop Kito Pikahu, and I thought it was a perfect metaphor to describe the place of professional development. He told us the story about two men who were given an axe each and told to go and clear a hill of scrub. One guy had to clear the left-hand side of the hill, and another guy had to clear the right-hand side of the hill. The guy who was doing the left-hand side of the hill, he was known to be a hard worker who could work from dawn to dusk without stopping. The other guy wasn't quite so athletic, and he decided that every hour he'd take a 10-minute break. At the end of the day, when they came back, the guy who worked his guts out without stopping had cleared 3/4 of the hill. The guy who took a 10-minute break every hour, he actually cleared the whole side of the hill. And the guy who worked his guts out couldn't understand why it was that this had happened. So he asked the other guy, "Why is it that you are able to clear the whole side of the hill?" And he said, "Well, every time I sat down for a 10-minute break, I sharpened my axe." And that's a metaphor for always making sure teachers have time, regular time, for them to sharpen their tools, to hone their skills. There's no point just going on, working and slogging their guts out for 10, 15, 20 years without having regular professional development where they can sharpen their axe, sharpen their tools. And I think that we need to create the conditions where teachers are able to do that. We need to support teachers. We don't need to keep hammering away and drive them like slaves. Mr. Speaker, this bill, I've already said in the committee stages, looks at secondary, tertiary programs, and I think that this does have merit. I know there's no evidence to say that this is definitely going to make a difference to students' education, but I think it is a perfect opportunity to have researchers follow these programs for the next 5 or 10 years or so that it can be determined whether or not they actually do make a difference. And I'm really hoping they do, because they change the context in which students are learning. They give an element of choice to students who are not necessarily comfortable or succeeding in the traditional school setting, and so they have this opportunity to go off and to work in a tertiary setting. It's mainly around apprenticeships, and that's great. We need to encourage students to follow different avenues. I do have a concern that those students may be, in particular if they're difficult students to teach, that they may be actually encouraged to head off down a trade type line instead of encouraging them to necessarily stay at school if they do have the brains. But regardless of those side issues, I do think it is an opportunity worth exploring, and one I think that we should take further in terms of changing the context that students can learn in by setting up specialist schools. Perhaps a pilot in a city area where parents have the choice not just to send their children to a regular school where they do the maths and the science and the social studies and English, but instead they have the opportunity to send their child to, say, an arts school where the children still learn to read and write, but they do it around the theme of art. They could learn about art history, they could practice different types of art, they could do dance, they could learn dance, they could learn drama, they could learn to sculpture, they could do whatever, but it's based around a particular context and a particular theme, so that the children would be engaged, or hopefully would be engaged in their learning. For example, if you wanted to teach your child in a regular school how to play the violin, you'd have to hope that someone who can play the violin gets a job as a music teacher. Whereas if you had an art school where music was part of the curriculum, the school could apply especially for a violin teacher, and that teacher, you would expect, being able to play the violin, would have that intense passion and flair for what they were teaching and the love of their subject, and you would hope that they would have better results because they would bring that passion into the job. So, Mr. Speaker, again, just to finish off, I'm glad we're going to vote against it, other than that particular Part 1A that protects kids in the early childhood in the little daycare centres in malls and that. I think that's a sensible thing to do. It was dangerous it was a dangerous oversight, I believe, in the original bill, and I'm glad that part has actually been returned. Kia ora.